What if the telephone wasn't invented? It all started when Alexander Graham Bell was 16 and started to help with his father's business by working with the deaf. His father hoped that Bell would follow his footsteps and take full charge of the family business. On July 1870, his family moved to Ontario, Canada, and Bell continued to study the human's voice. In 1871, Bell moved to Boston and began working on a device that would allow the telegraph transmission of several messages set to different frequencies. He spent a lot of time trying to perfect the harmonic telegraph until he came up with an idea of transmitting voice over wires. Bell hired a skilled electrician, Thomas Watson, and this was a great partnership. In 1874, Bell had an idea that in order to transmit the voice electrically, the device would need a continuous electrical wave of the same form as the sound waves. On July 1st, 1875, Bell succeeded in transmitting sound, but they weren't intelligible, so he tried to improve the telegraph by making it talk. On March 10th, Bell hooked up his latest design known as the liquid transmitter into an electrical circuit, and Watson heard Bell's voice. Legend has it that Bell knocked over a container of transmitting fluid and shouted, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want you." And he heard a noise over the wire. So he called Mr. Watson through the telephone, which signifies the first telephone call. However, what would have happened if Bell didn't invent the liquid transmitter, and his plan of making a working telephone never worked? On July 1881, President James A. Garfield was shot in the back and the doctors wasn't able to locate the bullet and he died. Bell decided to invent an electrical bullet probe that emits a sound when it is near metal. This invention helped save lives during the Boer War and World War I because it helped doctors find bullets in wounded soldiers. However, the invention uses induction balance, which Bell discovered while developing the telephone. So without induction balance, the device wouldn't work, which means that we lose a lot of soldiers' lives because the doctor couldn't use the device to find bullets in wounded soldiers. On October 14, 1962, a U-2 aircraft took several pictures showing Soviet Union's nuclear missile under construction in Cuba, and this started the Cuban Missile Crisis. On October 22nd, he ordered a naval blockade on Cuba and told Khrushchev that U.S. would not permit offensive weapons to be delivered into Cuba and to dismantle all missile bases. Khrushchev responded by saying that the blockade was an act of aggression and the Soviet ships to Cuba are going to proceed. On October 24th and 25th, ships would turn back from the quarantine line or stopped by U.S. naval forces. On October 27th, a U-2 plane was shot down and U.S. destroyers were enforcing charges on Soviet submarines. The submarine commanders were rattled enough to talk about firing nuclear torpedoes, but luckily aborted last minute by the second captain. Even the United States was about to fire at the Soviet Union, but luckily a phone call from the president stopped it. If the phone wasn't invented, then the president wouldn't have been able to communicate with the commander right away to stop the missile launching. So the commander would have had fired at the submarine, which would anger the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union would declare war with the United States. This war would have been a nuclear war which would destroy everything and kill a lot of innocent people. This is a daily news newspaper on October 28, 1962, saying that the Soviet Union has declared war on the United States. 3 days later, the Soviet Union decided to drop an atomic bomb on New York Times Square. This is a picture of Times Square after the atomic bomb was dropped. 2 days after the Times Square bombing in New York, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on Moscow, Russia. This is a picture of Moscow, Russia after the atomic bomb was dropped. Steve Jobs co-founded the Apple Company in 1976. On June 29, 2007, Steve Jobs released the first iPhone, which is a touchscreen mobile phone with an iPod, camera, and web browsing capabilities, and everyone knows Apple as a phone company. However, if the telephone was never invented, Steve Jobs would probably be known as someone who improved the telegraph. Then everyone would view the Apple Store as a telegraph company and not a phone company. If the telephone was never invented, the way we communicate would be very different and difficult, because a phone makes it easier to communicate with our family and friends.